So good to see you and good to be with you. I've been looking forward to the opportunity of coming here and being with you for a long time, and glad it's worked out that we could come. Glad that COVID has eased enough where in fact we can still do this. We haven't done any gospel meetings in the last couple of years. In fact, this is the first one I've preached in about 2 years. And so that's just really exciting for me to be able to have this opportunity again. And to be with Andy and Melina, of course, that's always special to us, and glad to be able to do that. I'm going to start by telling you a story, something that was an interesting event for me. I've been to Africa several times preaching there. And a few years ago, on my first trip to Africa, really, as you see a picture of me in here, I have dark hair, so you know it's several years ago. It was an interesting experience. One of our first places we went to teach in a village called Leseth. We had received word from a native preacher there that there was some people, as he said, I think they are ready to repent. They're ready to obey the gospel. He'd been teaching there. He says, but I need more help. They need more teaching. Ken McDaniel and I had planned a trip to Zimbabwe and working with this young preacher, and we made it to this village. And as we pulled up, there were 25 or 30 people waiting for us as we got there one morning, sitting out underneath a tree. That's where we would teach for the next 3 days. And it was an interesting experience. My first trip, I made 12 trips now to Africa. And first trip there, still kind of learning the ropes and trying to figure out what to expect. But on this day, there were a lot of people waiting there to hear us preach. And it's a different world. There's a lot of things to learn just about people's living environment and their needs. Well, the physical needs, we couldn't meet their physical needs. In fact, that's not why we were there. We were there to tell them about understanding their spiritual needs and understanding, here's what God has done for you. And so we talked to them about those who could become God's own people. That God has, in fact, provided for us a way, a means that we can be counted as His own. But it requires for us to be a people content to be separated from the world and move closer to God, to be attached to Him, be joined to Him through His Son, Jesus Christ. And so as we taught lessons, Ken would teach, then I would teach. We went back and forth, all day long. And then the next day we came back and did that again. And on the third day, we were working more on just the plan of salvation, redemption. Here is what God offers through His Son. How God wanted to have many sons like His only begotten. And that salvation comes through Him. And of course, repentance is needed. We had a lot to say in those 3 days about repentance. And as time has gone on, I've come to realize and understand that's a lesson that has to be preached here too, perhaps more often than we do. That to be the people of God, we have to change. That means repenting from a way of life that separates us from God and turning to Him. And as we talked about such things as repentance being taught, there were a number of people that were moved by that. And in fact, on the third day of preaching, there were several that responded to this preaching about Jesus. And so, as we were kind of about the middle part of that third day, Ken McDaniel asked the question, are there any today who are ready to obey the gospel, who are ready to repent of their sins, change their lives, and to become children of God through baptism? And there were 12 that day. And in fact, later that night, there were 4 more. But it was interesting to me, there was this one man named Mikado, that's kind of standing here, that all through those 3 days, he was sitting right there to my right side. In fact, let me back up here for just a moment. Let's see, in this picture right here, you can see him in that circle sitting to my right side. And every time we would ask for questions, he'd always be the first one to raise his hand and ask questions. He asked a lot of questions. And I asked him about that later. I said, Mikado, you have more questions than anybody else. And he says, no, he says, many others have questions, but they won't ask. So I ask the questions. He was kind of a leader among them. And interesting, jumping ahead in the story some, that church is still there that was established, 15 years ago. Mikado preaches there now and continues to work with that group. But as there were about 12 who said, yes, I'm ready, I want to obey the gospel. They confessed Christ, and we made preparations to baptize them. We walked about a mile to a place where we were told, oh, there's good water. There is good water, but it's just there. Well, just there is about a mile walk to this muddy water hole. And as we were walking along, it was very interesting to me. The people were very happy and jovial. They were talking loudly among themselves, and I couldn't understand a word they were saying, but they were happy, and they were singing songs all the way as we went to this place where there was good water, where there could be baptism. Well, sometimes I've learned over time that in Africa, there are those who are really scared of water. Water is not, in many places, a recreational thing as it may be here. And to be in water is something that's scary. And, well, Crocs have something to do with that. But there's just a fear of being in water and putting your head under water. And so I've been told this could be a problem. And so when it was time to start baptizing, it was Mikado who stood up and said, I'll go first. And so he was the first one to go into the water, and as he was being baptized, it actually took 3 times to baptize him, not because he was scared, but because they couldn't find a spot where the water was deep enough, and we couldn't get him all the way under, and he'd get up and they'd move out a little bit farther and a little farther until they found a hole where he could be baptized. And I wish I'd taken a picture of his white T-shirt that when he was done, it looked like chocolate milk. It was just, the water there was just so dirty. 12 were baptized. It was very emotional to me just to see all that happening and to see the excitement that they had, knowing that they had Christ, knowing that they had salvation of sins, knowing that they were now a child of God. As we were walking back, it was Mikado who was walking next to me. He could speak broken English, so we could converse. As we were walking back, it was much more quiet, and that was a little perplexing to me. I would have thought there had been singing on the way back, but they were very serious-minded, and it was like contemplation going on. And at some point, Mikado spoke up, and he says, today, he says, I am very happy, and I am very sad. I said, Mikado, I don't think I understand. What do you mean, that you're very sad? It probably wasn't the right word, but what he meant was, he says, I must be now very careful about what I say and what I do, because now I represent Christ. And I just love that. He got it. He understood that now he was different, and that people would hear what he said, and people would see what he did. And he knew and he understood that his life had to reflect Christ. He got it. And it made me think at that point, and I've thought about it many times since then, I wondered, do we get it? Do we understand that as Christians today, as disciples of Christ, we represent Christ? And that has to be reflected in all that we say and we do. People listen to what we say. I don't know what happened on this background. It's supposed to be dark, but it's changed somehow here. I hope that doesn't blind you. I can tell it's so bright you're going like this, not by design. Something just happened here in the translation. People listen to what we say. And this is something that we need to take some very careful consideration of. If they hear us talking the same way that the world talks, what are they to assume? And sometimes we think, well, wait, people shouldn't make judgments. People shouldn't assume anything. But wait a minute, they do. So do we. We make judgments about people by the things that they say. We listen to what they say. And if they hear filthy language coming from us, they can only assume that we are aligned with the world. If we talk like the world, they will assume that we are aligned with the world. I want us to look at some passages here. We're going to Ephesians Chapter 5. In fact, we're going to bounce between Ephesians and Colossians here for just a little while. And I'd like you to look with me. Ephesians Chapter 5. In fact, you can't even read that, can you? Not really? Can you? I'm just going to turn this off if I knew how. How do I black this out? Does that do it? It did. All right. All right, we're going to Ephesians chapter 5. And let's see, we're going to start in verse 1. Think about what the apostle is saying to these Christians. Here's a beautiful reminder. He says in verse 1, "Therefore be followers of God as dear children. Walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma." Just gives a description here, a reminder of who we are. If you're going to be a follower of God, take note. If you're going to be a follower of God, here's how we need to walk. Verse 3, contrast. "But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving thanks." Giving of thanks. So the contrast here is just extreme. I think that's the point. That's the idea here. We need to see the contrast. Filthy language is not becoming of a Christian. It doesn't belong. It's just not who we are. Filthiness, the word that's used here, literally obscenity. All that is contrary to purity. We get it. We know what those words are. Foolish talking is the idea of talk which is both foolish and sinful. Coarse jesting literally is the idea where polished and witty speech is used as the instrument of sin. Sometimes we can say some things in such a way where there's innuendos. Sometimes we think it's funny, and it could be funny, but it's just not right. It's not the kind of talk that needs to be coming out of our mouth. It's not the idea that we need to be expressing. So we think about foolish, filthy talking and foolish talking, coarse jesting. We hear it all the time. It's around us everywhere we go. And we kind of become used to it. You know, it used to be that if there were some people in a gathering and guys are talking and sometimes the conversation gets a little bit on that edge and there's a lady present, a man would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," would apologize, because they've said something a little out of the way, off color. And yet, I'm not saying that was great. That's not an excuse. I'm just saying that's something that used to happen. And yet I've noticed these days, it might be the lady that is having these things to say. It's changed in my lifetime. I've seen that kind of a change that has taken place. I guess it's because we've just got used to it. And especially, maybe it's in our time as women have just become so much a part of the workforce, where some years, young people wouldn't understand this as much. In years past, maybe it wasn't quite that way as much. We're just used to hearing filthy language. It's on TV all the time. I mean, even it used to be there that there was some measure about what was being said and what kind of words can be used. Not anymore. I mean, you don't know what you're going to hear on TV. For a long time, for 30 years or so, I worked in secular work and worked around a lot of folks where anything could be said all the time and was said all the time. And to some degree, you just get used to that, I guess. I'm not saying that's a good thing. In fact, I want to make the point, I think that's a bad thing. One time a few years ago, I was in the living room and I just sat down. I thought I'm just going to try to watch some TV and rest for a while. And I'm just flipping through the channels. And I don't know what it was I landed on. But at some point, Sandra stuck her head around the corner. She says, "I don't know how you can listen to that." And I said, "What?" She says, "That language." And I said, "What did they say?" She says, "Well, I'm not going to say it." And I don't know what they said, but I should have. It should have caught my attention. It should have done something to me to say, I don't need to listen to that. But I was just used to it. I don't think we need to get used to that. It's something that should be offensive to us. It's something that should bother us. And certainly, it should be something that never comes out of our mouth. Because we represent Christ. Our lives reflect His life. And yet we hear it all the time. But we just can't talk that way. Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3. And in verse 8, just kind of stepping into something that's being said, just pulling out of verse 8. But now you also put off all of these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. For sure. Put these things away. These things just don't, it's just not fitting for those who are saints. And what if people hear lies from us? Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy for us to say something that's just not true. I mean, we categorize lies. Have you noticed that? You have those really bad ones that's just blatant, and you have those ones that's not so bad, and you have the little fibs. But really, I'm telling you, there's not a difference one to the other. If it's untruth, it shouldn't be coming from our mouth. It is just not fitting for us. It's still there in Colossians 3, verse 9. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds, but have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. You see, if we are living in the image of Christ, if we are trying to reflect him in our life, lies are not a part of us. They are not a part of who we are. True repentance means reformation of life. It means a change of life. Maybe we used filthy language at some point in our life. Maybe we lied, but not now. Not now, because we reflect Christ in our life. I think it's easier for some people to lie than just tell the truth. I mean, they get so used to lying that it becomes just natural to them. There was this guy at work years ago. He worked in a shop next to ours, and every so often he'd come over and talk. He was a pretty nice guy as far as some of that goes, but he got pretty outlandish in some things he would say. In fact, he just didn't tell the truth often. In fact, one day he'd been over talking about some things, and after he'd left, I got thinking about it, went over to my buddy, and I said, Kurt was just over here, and he was saying such and such. And he said, I don't know if it was true or not. And he kind of laughed at me, and he said, let me ask you something. Was his lips moving? I said, yeah. And it was a lie. That was his response. And I thought, it probably was. I mean, that was just his reputation. Can you imagine? I mean, this is a guy who was a pretty nice guy. He came to work every day, did his job. He had a family, but he just couldn't tell the truth. Or he would just stretch things, in such a way that it was just not true. But not us. We are servants of Jesus Christ. And if we are servants of Jesus Christ, our life reflects him. And people will listen to what we say, and our life must reflect his. Lies become such a way of life for some. But it just can't be for us. And sometimes it seems as though, as we said before, we kind of categorize lies. Or maybe even in the big list of sins, we think, well, you got some really big ones up there that are really bad, but lying, it's kind of like a little sin. I don't think so. It's just not that way at all, in fact. Sin is sin, and we need to understand it just that way. It cannot be pleasing to God if we lie, because it is sin. That's what it is. Satan is the father of lies. We know that about him. Jesus said that about him in John chapter 8. And of God we know that this is one of the truths, that God cannot lie. Hebrews tells us about that. What a contrast. Does that tell us something? Those who are followers of Satan may be just like their father Satan. They can lie just like him. But if we are children of God, our Father cannot lie. Neither can we. And there's a price to pay if we choose to lie, just like every other sin. All liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Revelation 8 or chapter 21 and verse 8. Just in case we think lying is not that big of a sin, God says it is. Put it away. Let's think in contrast for a moment. Let's think in contrast to words that are ugly and filthy. lies that come out of the mouths of some. Let's think in contrast to that, to words that edify. We're going back to Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, in verse 29. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. This latter part of chapter 4, the apostle has got several subjects that he deals with, just kind of in short matter. This is sort of like matter-of-fact type of instruction. Matter of fact. Don't let corrupt communication come out of your mouth. No, that can't happen. What should come out of your mouth is words that edify. Edify, the idea of building up. In fact, literally, that's what the word means, is the act of building. What comes out of our mouth should be encouraging, words that lift up. Do you know some people that are just so good at that? I mean, some people excel at being able to say the right thing at the right time, and just whatever they say is going to be words of encouragement, words that lift up, words that make us feel better and stronger in faith. Some people are just good at that. I think they've practiced at it, and they've become very good at it. Words that edify. There's quite a contrast between tearing down and building up. A long time ago, I was about 16 years old or so, and I had a pickup truck. Well, my dad did. I tried to claim it, and he would remind me from time to time that it belonged to him. And I put an ad in the newspaper in our little town, one summer, do odd jobs, have a pickup can haul. And a guy called me in town to behind his house. He had this little one-car garage that was kind of leaning over his old wooden garage. And he said, I need this torn down and hauled off. Can you do it? Yes, sir, I can do that. And set about that task, though I had no idea at all how I was going to do that. Never tore anything like that down. But a 16-year-old boy can be pretty good at tearing things up. And I had a truck and I had a chain. Figured it out. And then busted it up and hauled that off. Tearing down took me about 3 days to tear that little garage down and haul it off. I was pretty good at tearing down. Years later, Sandra and I, we've built a couple of houses, and we did a lot of the building. And when you scratch ground, from the time you scratch ground to the time you move in, it took more than 3 days. It took a long time. And in fact, even after we moved in, we were still building on those houses for a long time. There's a big difference between tearing down and building up, and we get that. We understand the difference in that. And now we try to make some application to the words that come out of our mouth. There's a big difference between words that tear down and words that build up. And we are told that what needs to not come from our mouths is words that tear down. Words that are filthy and ugly and lies and all of these things that are just contrary to the character of Jesus Christ. But instead what comes from our mouths is words that build up. Back to Colossians again. In Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. And let's see, we're going to look at verses 5 and 6. Colossians chapter 4, verse 5. Walk in wisdom toward those who are outsiders, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Well, my first question when reading this, some of the phrases here is, what does that mean? I mean, what does that really mean? That our speech should be with grace, seasoned with salt. And I think the idea is that there should be a purity in the things that we say, a certain sweetness and loving kindness and goodwill and favor that flows from our mouth. That there's nothing offensive that comes from our mouth. That there is nothing that is going to put somebody off. There's nothing that's going to surprise somebody in a negative way, like, I can't believe he said that. I thought he was a Christian. This doesn't fit. This doesn't work. No, that's not language that is seasoned with grace. And the idea here of seasoned with salt. Well, we understand salt is a quality that, when used correctly, makes food taste more agreeable to us. It's something that's nice. It's something that's pleasant to us. And so, certainly, then, that's true with the influence that we should have one with another. That we encourage each other with the things that we say. We lift each other up. We edify. But I think in part what this text is talking about is those who are outside. Those who aren't Christians. Those walk in wisdom toward those who are outsiders. We have influence. In the things we say, we have influence. And we need to understand how far that influence goes. And we need to understand that there are those who are not Christians who need to be. There are those that we should have influence with. There are those that we are trying to draw to Christ. And one of our ways or means of drawing them to Christ, to be able to study with them, is who we are, our character. It means something because people are watching us. People are listening to what we say. And we need to represent Christ. When people hear us talk, do they hear Christ? And what about the things they see? Because people watch us as well. And if they see us doing the same things that the worldly people do, what would they assume? But they would assume, and I think correctly, that we are aligned with the world, that we are just like them. They'll make judgments based on what they see. And so what do they see in us? Do they see someone who is aligned with the world, or do they see a spiritual person, someone who is trying to walk with Christ? To be spiritual is one who is trying to draw close to God. And that will be reflected not just in the things that we say, but in the things we do. It makes a difference what we do. And it's the humble who desire to draw close to Him, those who are willing to submit to Him. And submitting to Him means that we are willing to change our lives. And it may even be that we find that there are things that we did before we were a Christian that we're not so comfortable doing now, or at least we shouldn't be so comfortable doing now. James chapter 4. James chapter 4. And in verse 7, a familiar passage, you know. Just very simply, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And the thought that comes to my mind with that is that if Christ is in control of our lives, if we have humbled ourselves in such a way where we are letting Christ lead us in this life, that's going to be evident. And people will see Him in us. The emphasis here is not that people see us. Is that they see Christ in us. That's the point of emphasis. But how do we do that? How do we change in such a way where we become closer to Christ and where people can see Him in us? Back to Colossians again. Colossians chapter 3. Here's how we change. Colossians 3, the first 3 verses here, is one of those texts that in so many ways needs no explanation. Just to read it and then to go back and just look at the phrases that we see in this text. I want us to think about it. If then you were raised with Christ, and contextually I think he's making a reference to what he said in chapter 2. He's speaking to those who were buried with Christ in baptism. He's been raised with Him. And so chapter 3, verse 1, so then if you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You were raised. It's the acknowledgement of the fact that you've made a choice. You've made this choice to do something different. That you have made a choice to do what God would want us to do. buried in baptism into Jesus Christ, and now you're raised. What does that mean? Well, our thinking is different now. Seek those things which are above. No longer are we looking at or concerned about the things of the world. No, our focus is on things above, because that's where Christ is. And so we ask ourselves, where are we looking? Where is our focus? Where are our greatest interests? Are they spiritual things? Or are they things of this world? Verse 2 says, set your mind. The idea here that there is a choice that has to be made. We have to determine, where do we want our mind to go. Set your mind on these things above. Set your mind. I've said many times, I remember one of the things I remember so much and so well from my mom growing up. I don't know how many times she said to me, she says, you can do and accomplish anything you set your mind to. And I think the reason she said that to me so many times is because I needed to hear it that many times. There needed to be some greater focus on some things. And I think that's why the apostle put these words for us here. Set our minds on things above, not on things of this earth. There's the contrast. Which will it be? And I'm asking you, we need to think about that. Which will it be? Will we set our minds on things above or on things of this earth? I'm not seeing it in the middle here, are you? Which will it be? Set our minds on things above, or we're going to set our minds on the things of the earth. There's a big difference in this life and in that which is to come. Which will it be? We have to choose. Why? Because you died. Your life is hidden with Christ. And so who are we trying to look like? Who are we trying to be like? We can choose to be like the world. We can talk like the world. We can act like the world. We can dress like the world. We can go to the places that the world will go. Or we can do the things becoming of one who is a disciple of Christ. The standard is set. The apostle said it this way in Philippians 1, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ. What we do makes a difference. And we have to choose what our conduct will be. And so how we act says so much about who we are. Our conduct matters. People see us. And our lives need to be that which reflects Christ. And if they see us acting just like the world acts, they will assume that we are of the world. And I'm going to say, they're probably right. And so we have to choose. We can make the choice to be lights of the world. Turning back a couple of pages to Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. We begin at verse 14. Philippians 2, verse 14. Do all things without murmuring and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. What do people see in us? We can be lights in the world. Our lives can be that people can see Christ in us. And our hope, our prayer is that they would be moved by that. Not because of us. It's not about us. But that they see Christ in us and they want to have that in them. That's our interest. That's our concern. There's a big difference between the darkness of this world and spiritual thinking. The contrast between darkness and light, we understand how big, how great that is. Spiritual thinking leads one to be like Christ. And if we are the lights of the world that we need to be, it is God who is glorified. Jesus said that in Matthew 5, verse 16. God is the one that is glorified. And so it's like Mikado, all those years ago, he said, now I represent Christ. He got it. He knew the difference. He wanted to be a servant of God. And he wanted his life to change and reflect in such a way that people would know and people would see that he was a servant of God. And I want us to be that way. I want us to understand the importance of being that example before others. I want us to understand the importance of having our lives aligned with Christ in such a way that God can see and count us as one of His own. That's what I want us to see. And I want us to desire to be servants of God. Thank you for listening so well. Andy, we're going to do a song now.